The boarding pass crumpled. The sound of paper being crushed tore through the first-class cabin like an invisible slap across dignity. "Sir, this seat is not yours." The voice of Chief Flight Attendant Clara Jensen was so cold it silenced even the hum of the engines. First class on Altius 327 glowed like a golden chapel. Cream leather seats, crystal glasses chiming softly, linen folded perfectly. In seat 1A sat Daniel Mercer, 48 years old, CEO of Orion Technologies, back straight, dark blue tie neatly knotted, thin framed glasses resting on steady eyes. He did not need to assert himself. His silence was the kind that commanded attention. He placed his tablet down, calmly handed over his boarding pass, and said quietly, "Daniel Mercer, 1A." Clara felt her chest tighten. She had handled crises before, dissolved disputes with nothing but a smile. But today, from the moment Richard Caldwell, Chapter 55, longtime investor, stepped into the cabin reeking of old wine and carrying the air of "This is my kingdom," the order of things had tilted. Richard stood looming over 1A, chin raised, gold watch glinting beneath the lights. "I've sat in this seat for years." In 2D, Evelyn Drake, 51, tilted her head, watching. The razor-sharp aura of someone steering a fund that controlled Altius made her seem like a blade wrapped in velvet. No one noticed the slight flicker in her eyes when she saw Clara hesitate. No one heard the quiet sigh stifled by the young entrepreneur in 3A, who could already feel injustice seeping beneath the carpet. "Regulations don't account for familiar seats, sir," Daniel said, voice even and low. Not angry, not shaken, just a straight line of certainty. Clara glanced at Richard, then back at the ticket. In that moment of hesitation, she heard her own thoughts. "Don't stir waves in this cabin, Clara." The weight of complaint calls, closed door briefings, and big names who could ruin a career all pressed into her fingers. And so, fearing the storm named Richard more than she respected a piece of paper, she clenched, and rip! The boarding pass collapsed into a crumpled knot. The rasp of paper made the man in 3A lift his head. The middle-aged passenger in 1C cleared his throat. In 2D, Evelyn set her glass down, her brows still, but her eyes darkened. Richard smirked. "You see? 1A is mine." Daniel did not move for a long beat. He looked at the wad of paper in Clara's hand, as though staring into a mirror, reflecting years of calm perseverance through thorns. Sometimes the greatest power lies in choosing composure. He nodded once, words clipped. "I'll take 4C." Then he rose. The pace of the story quickened. Daniel's steps were slow, deliberate, gliding across the thick carpet. Eyes followed. Whispers hissed through the rim of crystal glasses. Clara felt momentarily lighter, relieved for having avoided upheaval, heavy with the knowledge that she had pushed someone away from justice. In 4C, Daniel sat down and slid his tablet aside. His heartbeat did not quicken. Anger did not flare. What surfaced instead were memories. Boardrooms where people sized him up with questions laced in prejudice. Contracts where his signature saved thousands of jobs. Yet their eyes still measured him as an outsider. History is not only written in books. It lives in the way a boarding pass is crushed. Richard, now triumphant in 1A, leaned back, gestured for champagne, his smile as hollow as glass. "Back to the way it should be," he muttered, making sure 3 seats nearby could hear. Clara passed by 4C, her professional smile plastered in place, her palms slick with sweat. "Did I do the right thing?" A small voice whispered, "No." A louder voice murmured, "Don't make things complicated." Evelyn observed in silence, as if reading sheet music where a wrong note had just sounded. She saw 2 truths, Richard's crude arrogance and Daniel's deliberate composure. She recognized that kind of calm, rare, born only of those who understand true power doesn't need to be displayed. And Evelyn also knew there are buttons buried deep. Touch one, and the whole system trembles. Daniel opened his phone. His thumb hovered over a secure messaging app, tapped a single contact. The cursor blinked like a live wire waiting to close. He typed one word. Now. Sent. He shut the phone, eyes fixed on the silent space between 1A and 4C. A brief pause. Then the usual sounds returned. Spoons touching porcelain, the gears of the coffee machine, measured footsteps. But a few, very few, felt the faintest shift in the air, like pressure dropping before a storm rolls in. Richard raised his glass, unaware a switch had just flipped behind him. Clara adjusted a tablecloth, oblivious that the wave she feared was turning. The young man in 3A glanced toward 4C. The man stripped of his seat did not rage, did not shout. He sat tall, inhaled deeply, as if measuring the speed of a storm still distant. The narrator, time itself, pushed open the door to the next chapter, where silence was no longer surrender, but a drill bit. And the first-class cabin of Altius, where order had always been sacred, was about to learn what true order meant. The game had just changed, triggered by a single word sharp as a heartbeat. Now. The first-class cabin of Flight 327 radiated a different kind of atmosphere, as if it were a world entirely detached from the chaos outside. Soft golden light correlated over rows of cream leather seats, polished wooden panels glimmered, and the faint aroma of Arabica coffee mingled with a trace of sandalwood. Every detail whispered of luxury and order. Daniel Grant sat in seat 1A, calm as though he were the axis holding the cabin in balance. A navy-tailored suit fit snugly on his solid frame. Thin, black-rimmed glasses caught the light from the tablet in his hand. Graphs and numbers flickered across the screen, a digital symphony he had orchestrated himself. At 44, Daniel no longer needed noise to assert power. It was his talents, the upright posture, the steady gaze that carried weight. He had learned early, true power does not need to shout. It could be nothing more than a quiet breath in a room, and yet it compelled everyone to listen. The rhythmic footsteps of flight attendants echoed like a well-rehearsed dance. They smiled, bowed slightly, poured wine, and served meals with mechanical precision. Yet in the eyes of Nyan Harper, the chief flight attendant, there was a flicker of hesitation as she passed Daniel. He noticed only in passing, but that flicker would soon become the crack that let the storm in. Behind the curtain dividing the cabin, the engines hummed steadily. Green taxiway lights slid past the windows. The cabin floated between two worlds. Outside was haste and disorder. Inside was a deceptive calm. But into that stillness came a voice, sharp, decisive, dripping with disdain. "That is not your seat." The words sliced the air like a blade. Daniel looked up, eyes dark but flashing, and set his tablet down with unsettling composure. Just a few steps away stood a large man in a dark grey suit, blocking the aisle with shoulders wide and a gaze heavy with arrogance. Harrison Beckett. The name was no stranger in finance, a wealthy investor, the embodiment of old money, a kind of power that flaunted itself without needing to prove anything. In his 50s, Harrison still carried the broad frame and imperious stare of a man who believed the world was made to serve him. "You're mistaken," Harrison said, voice thick with self-assurance. "Seat 1A is mine." Daniel did not frown, did not bristle. He rose slowly, each movement measured to maintain calm. From the inside pocket of his suit, he drew his boarding pass, unfolded it, and extended it toward Harrison. "Daniel Grant, seat 1A." The crinkle of paper was loud against the muted drone of the aircraft. Passengers nearby fell silent, eyes drawn to the standoff. In an instant, the first-class cabin had turned into a stage, every glance taut with anticipation. Nyan stepped forward, her face betraying an inner struggle. In her hand lay Daniel's boarding pass. Her gaze flicked from the paper to Harrison's face, and then she clenched the ticket tight, crushing it into a ball. The sound of paper grinding into a wad cracked the air like a slap. Daniel's expression remained composed, his silence the strongest reply. No anger, no argument, only a stillness that made those watching even more uneasy. "We'll arrange another seat for you." 4C, Nyan said, her smile forced, never touching her eyes. "Please, let's not cause a scene." An insult dressed as courtesy, a gentle push delivered as humiliation. Daniel nodded once. He picked up his tablet and walked with deliberate calm, each footstep a punctuation mark etched into the heavy air. No one spoke, but all felt it. The line had been crossed. He lowered himself into seat 4C. The leather was still fine, the space still refined, but it was far from the front, row seat that was rightfully his. And beneath his steady breathing, beneath the facade of composure, a current of calculation stirred. This was not defeat. This was the opening move in a far greater game. The first-class cabin, after the crumpled boarding pass, no longer felt the same. The engines still hummed steadily. The golden light still glowed softly across the leather seats. But the solace was no longer luxurious. It pressed down like a stone on everyone's chest. Daniel sat in 4C, his gaze fixed forward, never touching anyone. Yet in his silence there was a strange pull, unsettling those nearby. He was like a still lake, but beneath the surface swirled a hidden current. In 1A, Richard Caldwell reclined like a king. His fingers tapped against the armrest, his gold watch catching the light. He deliberately raised his voice, making sure the whole cabin heard him. "Order has been restored. The world needs to know who truly belongs where." A thin laugh slipped from his lips, sharp and full of contempt. Several passengers exchanged glances. Some immediately buried themselves in their newspapers, Others turned to the windows to avoid the truth before them. Yet a few eyes lingered, hesitant, uneasy, edged with suppressed indignation. In seat 2D, Evelyn Drake sat upright, hands resting lightly on her lap. Her face revealed nothing, but her eyes were sharp as blades. She glanced from Daniel to Richard, then to Clara Jensen. A slight furrow of her brow was enough for those who knew Evelyn to understand she was calculating. They had once been allies, Evelyn and Daniel. At one time, they dreamed of reshaping the financial world with principles of fairness. But years, power, and disputes over leadership philosophy had pushed them down diverging paths. And yet, in this moment, as she watched Daniel publicly humiliated, Evelyn felt an old chord within her vibrate again. Meanwhile, Clara Jensen forced a smile, but her hands trembled faintly in front of her. She knew what she had done was wrong, but it was not only Richard's fault. It was fear. Fear of losing her job, fear of losing her chance, fear that the name Caldwell could erase her career with a single phone call. That fear had made her an accomplice. A young passenger in 3A could no longer hold back. He leaned toward his companion and whispered, "He had the boarding pass. How can this be?" His friend tugged his sleeve, warning, "Don't get involved. It's not worth it." But a phone screen glowed in the hands of a woman across the aisle. She pretended to scroll the news, but her camera was secretly recording Richard's smug posture and Daniel's silence, heavy as stone. Within hours, that moment would no longer stay inside this cabin. It would explode into the world's view. Daniel leaned back in 4C. He did not flinch, but inside, memories piled upon each other. Boardrooms in Chicago, where barbed words hid behind diplomatic smiles. Perhaps you don't quite fit the culture here. The time a contract was denied because he supposedly didn't project the right image to lead the project. All of it replayed, compressed into a wound that had never fully healed. He unlocked his phone. The screen lit up, reflecting his dark, steady eyes. In the message box, only one word had already been typed: now. In 2D, Evelyn's phone buzzed lightly. She glanced down, saw the message. One word, but enough to trigger mechanisms long prepared. The corner of her lips curved almost imperceptibly. The storm had been switched on. Richard raised his glass of champagne, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "The world is still exactly as I know it. Some people are born for the front row. Others are meant to sit behind." Daniel did not look at him, but in his silence, the entire cabin seemed to hear a warning. The scales are tipping, and this time they will break. Richard Caldwell slammed his champagne glass down on the small table beside seat 1A, the sharp ring of crystal against wood echoing like a declaration of ownership. He leaned back, legs crossed in defiance, his eyes sweeping across the first-class cabin before settling deliberately on Daniel Mercer, seated in 4C. "You see," Richard sneered, his voice carrying for all to hear, "order must be preserved. Those who know their place never suffer humiliation. The problem is, some people don't understand that." The words cut through the air like a blade. A few passengers frowned. Others pretended to busy themselves with the screens in front of them. No one dared speak. The entire cabin seemed frozen. Daniel raised his head, his dark eyes calm but fathomless, like the ocean before a storm. He set his tablet down on the table beside him and rose slowly. Each step he he took forward, unhurried, quiet, tightened the tension in the air, like a string pulled to its limit. "Caldwell," Daniel said, his voice low and steady, each word resonating clearly. "I hold a valid ticket. I am seated exactly where I belong. But you think that investing in this airline entitles you to ignore its most basic principle, respect for its customers." The cabin stirred. A few passengers glanced quickly at Daniel, surprise mingling with admiration in their eyes. Clara Jensen, the chief flight attendant, stood frozen in the place, her throat dry. She knew Daniel was right, but the fear of Richard Caldwell, a powerful investor, a man who could ruin her career with a single phone call, sent tremors through her hands. "Mr. Caldwell is a long-standing platinum member," Clara stammered, trying to construct a flimsy justification. "He is often given priority for seat 1A. Daniel turned to her. His voice was calm, his nod slight. "Priority does not mean trampling others." His tone was not loud, but every word pierced the heavy air like a needle. Richard let out a hollow laugh, the sound ringing with arrogance. "Do you even know who I am? Without me, this airline wouldn't exist. This seat has always been mine." Daniel took one more step, standing directly beside Richard. He did not shout. He did not loom. He simply stood there, composed, and in that composure Richard's arrogance seemed strangely diminished. "Yes, I know who you are," Daniel replied, eyes locked on Richard's. "But that doesn't give you the right to take what you never paid for." A ripple of whispers spread through the cabin. A businesswoman in 2C murmured, "He's right. That's the truth." A young executive a few rows back nodded firmly, clutching the phone he was secretly recording with. Richard's face flushed red with anger. He jabbed a finger at Daniel. "If you keep this up, I'll call the board of directors myself. One phone call, and you'll be thrown off this plane immediately." For a heartbeat, time stood still. Clara swallowed hard. Evelyn Drake in 2D leaned forward, her eyes gleaming as if anticipating a pivotal moment. Daniel's lips curved slightly, his gaze sharp as steel. "Go ahead, Caldwell. Call them. And when you do, remember this." His voice dropped, cutting clean through the silence. "They'll call me back." The words landed like a blade's edge. No shouting, no threats. Yet every passenger in the cabin felt it. The man pushed from 1A was no weakling. He carried a power Richard Caldwell had never imagined. The cabin sank into silence. A silence thick and foreboding, the kind that signals the storm has only just begun. The air in the first-class cabin froze solid after Daniel's challenge. Richard Caldwell sat bolt upright, his hand gripping the champagne glass, trembling slightly, though he masked it with a contemptuous smirk. The other passengers remained silent, holding their breath as if waiting for thunder to strike in the sealed sky above them. In seat 2D, Evelyn Drake leaned forward, her steel-grey eyes flashing with the kind of light only those who have sat at the power table recognize. She was no longer a spectator. The single word message from Daniel still burned in her mind. Now. Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek black phone. Her long fingers tapped with deliberate precision, no hesitation. She opened an encrypted app, the very tool she and Daniel had once built together during a corporate reform project years ago. With just a few commands, Evelyn sent the order. Protocol Delta, activate immediately. Entire Flight 3227 crew to be relieved. The soft chime of scent was almost inaudible, but to Evelyn it rang like a drum, announcing the beginning of battle. Meanwhile, Clara Jensen stood frozen. Cold sweat traced down her back, her eyes avoiding both Daniel and Richard. Fear consumed her, yet deep inside a voice whispered, "I was wrong. Wrong from the moment I crushed that ticket." Richard still hadn't sensed the storm beneath him. He clapped twice, forcing a laugh to lighten the tension, his voice loud and triumphant. "There, you see, the matter is settled. Some people need to learn their limits, and as for me..." He never finished. A sharp ding cut him off. The intercom system lit up. "Attention passengers. Due to operational requirements, the entire current flight crew will be replaced immediately. Please remain seated while the transition is completed." The first-class cabin erupted in shock. Heads snapped up, voices whispered in confusion. A businesswoman covered her mouth, murmuring, "Replace the entire crew? What is happening?" Clara's knees nearly buckled. Her heart raced wildly. This kind of order had never occurred in the history of aviation. Richard glared at Clara, his voice a furious growl. "What the hell is going on? This is my plane, my cabin, my seat. Who dares pull this stunt?" Daniel did not respond. He simply lowered himself back into seat 4C, fingers interlaced, eyes half closed as though in meditation. Beneath the calm exterior, every vein pulsed with the rhythm of victory. Evelyn glanced at him briefly. No words were necessary. A single look exchanged was enough to confirm. The board had turned. The engines hummed lower as thrust decreased. A mechanical hiss signaled the jet bridge locking in place. Figures in dark blue uniforms appeared at the door. A new crew stepped aboard, their presence sharp and commanding like a regimented force. All eyes turned, and for the first time, Richard Caldwell fell silent. The seat in 1A, the glass of champagne, his arrogance. Suddenly, all of it shrank into a pathetic farce before the storm that had just begun. The cabin door opened with a sharp hiss. Every eye in first class turned toward the front. Footsteps echoed against the carpet. Not hurried, not chaotic, but steady, deliberate, carrying the authority of a unit trained to arrive at a destined moment. 3 new flight attendants in immaculate uniforms entered the cabin, followed by 2 fresh pilots with gleaming insignia on their shoulders. They did not need to say much. Their very presence was enough to wipe away the chaos that had consumed the cabin moments before. The new lead attendant, a tall woman named Sophia Marquez, stopped in the center of the aisle. Her black hair was tied neatly, her sharp eyes scanning each face. Her voice rang out clear, low, and firm. "Thank you for your patience. By direct order of the executive board, the entire previous crew will disembark immediately. This new team will ensure your flight continues with the highest safety and standards." The cabin fell into dead silence. Clara Jensen's face drained of color, her hands clenched until her knuckles turned white. There was no escape left for her. One by one, her colleagues lowered their heads and shuffled out, their faces caught between confusion and humiliation. Richard Caldwell erupted. "Outrageous! You cannot do this. I'm a founding shareholder. I demand this crew remain in place." Sophia turned calmly toward him, her tone steady. "I am sorry, Mr. Caldwell. This order comes from the very top. It is not open to negotiation." A ripple of whispers spread through the cabin. Passengers glanced at each other, some snapping photos on their phones, others exhaling with relief, as if justice itself had finally walked through the door. Meanwhile, Daniel Mercer sat quietly in 4C. He did not utter a word. Yet it was his silence that began to draw eyes toward him. From the moment the replacement began, he alone had shown no surprise, no anxiety, no unease, only stillness, composure, as if he had known all along. Evelyn Drake allowed herself a faint smile, lowering her head to pretend she was checking her phone. In her mind, a single thought echoed. This is when they realize true power does not lie in Caldwell's shouting, but in Daniel's silence. Richard pushed himself up, his face flushed, his hand trembling as he pointed straight at Daniel. "It's him. He orchestrated this entire thing. What could a first-class passenger possibly do? I will call the board right now." But before he could finish, a male voice rang out from the back of the cabin. Adrian Cole, the airline's corporate overseer in a dark, tailored suit, walked slowly forward. His gaze was stern, his tone measured and cutting. "Mr. Caldwell, as of this moment, all of your privileges within Altius Airlines are revoked. You no longer have the authority to intervene in this flight, nor to represent any of your shares." The cabin erupted with gasps and hushed chatter. Richard stood frozen, his phone slipping from his hand, his eyes vacant, as if his throne had just been stripped from him in front of the entire court. Daniel only tilted his head slightly, meeting Richard's gaze for the briefest moment. No gloating, no mockery. Only the calm of a man who knew with certainty that the balance of power had shifted. And in that moment, every passenger in the cabin understood. The man in seat 4C was anything but ordinary. First class sank into silence like a theater just before the climax. Every eye was fixed on Adrian Cole, the airline supervisor, as his words fell with the weight of a verdict etched in stone. Richard Caldwell opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His lips trembled. His eyes darted wildly in search of an ally. None met his gaze. Faces that once shrank before his power now turned away, or stared back with cold detachment. The false throne he had sat upon for years had just collapsed in the middle of seat 1A. Sophia Marquez, the new lead attendant, stepped forward. Her expression remained composed, but her voice carried an authority that left no room for doubt. "Mr. Mercer, please return to seat 1A. We sincerely apologize for the incident. Your place has been restored." The entire cabin held its breath. All eyes turned to Daniel Mercer. He sat there in 4C, his posture straight, his expression steady. In that moment, he looked like a king who had quietly observed the performance, waiting for the curtain to fall and reveal the truth. Daniel rose, slowly, without hurry. Each step toward seat 1A seemed to make the carpeted floor heavier, each tap of his leather shoes echoing in the silence and sending a shiver through the cabin. Richard leapt up, blocking the aisle. His voice rasped with desperation. "No, this can't be. That seat is mine. I've sat there for 10 years. Daniel stopped directly in front of him. His eyes were calm, his voice even, like the surface of a lake, yet carrying the weight of a storm. "Mr. Caldwell, this seat is not for someone who crowns himself king. It is for the one who holds the rightful claim and respects the rules. And today, you have lost both." A ripple of gasps swept through the passengers. A few nodded subtly. The young woman in 3A raised a hand to her mouth, her eyes shining as if she were witnessing something extraordinary. From 2D, Evelyn Drake allowed the faintest smile. She knew Daniel had not simply reclaimed a seat. He had made it clear to everyone present that true strength did not reside in Richard's shouting, but in his own unyielding silence. Sophia Marquez stepped closer to Richard, her voice steady and firm. "Mr. Caldwell, please vacate this seat. This is the official decision of the airline." Richard's composure shattered. He looked around, searching for a sympathetic glance. There was none. Instead, dozens of eyes stared back at him, cold, judging. His hand shook as it clutched his champagne glass, but at last he let it go. Daniel moved past him and sat down in 1A. The soft leather embraced him, a confirmation that order had been restored. No one spoke. But the atmosphere in first class had changed entirely. What had been suffocating tension was now replaced with a quiet respect. Daniel opened his tablet, scrolling calmly through reports as if nothing had happened. Yet for everyone else in the cabin, that image seared itself into memory. The proof that silence alone can dismantle an empire built on pretense. The air in first class felt heavy, as if someone had drained the oxygen from the cabin. Daniel sat firmly in seat 1A, posture composed, eyes calmly gliding across the tablet screen. His serenity only made Richard Caldwell's position look more pitiful. Richard still stood stranded in the aisle, his face flushed, breath uneven. He tried to swallow his rage, but it rose like a tidal wave, spilling out as desperate, broken words. "You can't do this to me. I am an investor. I've poured millions into this airline. I have more right to be here than any of you." His voice rang out, loud yet trembling, the sound of a man clinging to the last scraps of his power. Adrian Cole, the airline supervisor, stepped forward. His voice was steady, even, and cold. "Mr. Caldwell, the board has convened an emergency session. All of your privileges with Altius Airlines are revoked. You no longer hold priority status, nor the right to access first class, effective immediately." The cabin rippled with murmurs. A woman gasped behind her hand. "My God, right here on the plane!" Another whispered, "This is history. I've never seen anything like it." Richard staggered back a step, eyes wide with disbelief. "No, no! You wouldn't dare! I'll sue. I'll destroy this airline." At that very moment, two figures in security uniforms appeared at the front of the cabin. Their steps were slow, deliberate, and heavy with authority, each one striking like a verdict delivered. "Mr. Caldwell," one of them said, voice firm, "please collect your belongings. We will escort you off the aircraft immediately." The cabin froze. Not a single breath seemed to stir. Everyone watched the scene unfold, as though witnessing the final act of a film, the moment when the villain finally pays his price. Richard's eyes darted desperately from face to face, searching for support. None came. The same people who once bowed to his influence now avoided his gaze. A few passengers muttered, "Serves him right." Others quietly raised their phones, recording every second. Clara Jensen stood pressed against the bulkhead, her face drained of color. She understood that this was not only Richard's downfall, but also a sentence hanging over her own career. Richard cried out one last time, his voice cracking into pieces. "You'll regret this. I'll be back. I will." The threat never finished. The two security officers took his arms, not violently but with firm finality. They led him down the aisle, past rows of cold, unflinching eyes and faces filled with contempt. The champagne glass he left behind still shimmered, the liquid trembling inside. But no one touched it. It stood as a lonely symbol of a man who once believed himself untouchable, brought down in the very domain he thought he controlled. Daniel did not look up. He simply closed his tablet, laced his fingers together, and rested with eyes half shut. His calm stood in stark contrast to Richard's frantic struggle, and in that contrast lay his absolute victory. Evelyn Drake watched it all, a glint of cold satisfaction flashing in her eyes. Fallen like this, Caldwell will never rise again, and the world will remember this day. The man forced out of seat 1A was not Daniel Mercer, but Richard Caldwell himself. First class seemed to exhale all at once. An old era had just been pushed out through the cabin door, and a new order had begun. The sound of the aircraft door closing after Richard Caldwell was escorted out, left first class wrapped in an unusual silence. Not the suffocating tension from before, but the quiet of release, of a sentence carried out. Daniel Mercer sat still in seat 1A. The warm golden light poured over his shoulders, making him the natural center of the cabin without the need for any declaration. There were no more shouts, no more hollow arrogance, only the quiet authority of a man seated with composure, his deep eyes gazing through the window. Lead flight attendant Sophia Marquez stepped forward, her voice softened, a stark contrast to the firmness she had shown with Richard. "Mr. Mercer, on behalf of the airline, we offer our deepest apologies. We will ensure that the rest of this flight is the experience you truly deserve." She bowed her head, a small gesture, yet in this space it resounded like a vow. Daniel nodded lightly, a brief smile crossing his lips. He did not need an apology, for actions had already spoken louder than words. But he knew the passengers were watching, and each pair of eyes would carry this story further than any rumor ever could. A middle-aged man in seat 3C broke the silence. "You remained calm. That is truly admirable." His voice was not loud, but enough for a few others to nod in agreement. The young woman in 3A, who had quietly recorded everything on her phone from the very beginning, leaned forward and whispered, "Thank you. Not everyone has the courage to remain silent and still win." Her eyes glimmered with admiration and gratitude, as though Daniel had stood up on their behalf against the injustice everyone saw, but no one dared confront. At the back, Clara Jensen stood pressed against the wall, hands clasped tightly, her face pale. Every word from the passengers landed like a hammer. She felt the sharp divide between her own fear and Daniel's unwavering dignity. Inside her, a painful question echoed. If I had chosen rightly earlier, would I not be standing here in shame now? In seat 2D, Evelyn Drake sat tall, her gaze fixed on Daniel. She knew full well His victory today was not just about reclaiming a seat. It was a silent yet razor-sharp proclamation. The era of the Caldwells was over. Daniel lifted a glass of water from the table, took a sip, then set it back down. The simple motion carried a weight that made the cabin seem to breathe with him. A new atmosphere settled, no longer stifled, no longer under the shadow of false power, but solemnity rebuilt on dignity and justice. The passengers said nothing, yet their eyes shone bright. In that moment, they no longer saw a black businessman humiliated. They saw a symbol, a man who had proven that silence itself can sometimes be the strongest weapon. And Altius Flight 327, from this day forward, was no longer just a journey. It became a testament, a reminder that respect can be stripped away in an instant, but once reclaimed, it becomes eternal. First class had returned to order. But this order was no longer the same. It was no longer a facade that concealed arrogance, but a new space where every passenger sat within the respect that had just been restored. Daniel Mercer sat upright in 1A, his hands loosely clasped, eyes gazing out the window. The sky outside was dark, streaked with faint clouds lit by the glow of the city below. Yet in his mind, the light was clear. Not the light of a personal victory, but the light of systemic change. A woman's voice rose softly. "You haven't changed." Daniel turned his head. From seat 2D, Evelyn Drake leaned toward him. Her silver hair caught the cabin's golden light, her sharp eyes reflecting like glass. She did not smile, but her gaze carried respect mixed with remembrance. "Still the same way," Evelyn continued, her voice low, as if only for the two of them. "You stay silent until the whole world has no choice but to listen." Daniel's lips curved faintly. "And you are the same, stepping in at the right moment, decisive, leaving no room for anyone to breathe." In that instant, both understood. Despite years of debate, disagreements over philosophy, despite times they had stood on opposite sides, they remained allies when confronted with injustice. Evelyn tilted her head slightly, lowering her voice. "What happened today is only the beginning. Caldwell is not an exception. This system is filled with many more like him." Daniel nodded slowly, a contemplative fire flickering in his eyes. "I know, and we will not only reclaim a seat, we will reclaim the very meaning of the word, respect." Silence lingered. Evelyn studied him, her eyes softening. "Are you sure you're ready? This game won't stop at Caldwell. It will grow far fiercer." Daniel drew a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the sky opening before him. The fiercer it becomes, the more it will need someone to hold steady in silence. Not silence that bows its head, but silence of strength. This time, Evelyn truly smiled. She leaned back, yet her eyes stayed on Daniel, as they once had when they shared a dream of reform. Behind them, passengers whispered among themselves, but none dared to break the moment. They all felt it clearly. What had happened was not just an airline incident, but a sign of something much larger about to unfold. The overhead speaker came alive, the new pilot's voice calm and assured. "Ladies and gentlemen, the new crew has completed the handover. Our journey will continue." The engines grew louder, the aircraft trembling softly. But inside the cabin, everything had changed. People sat straighter, quieter, as though they had not only witnessed a dispute over a seat, but a lesson in dignity. Daniel closed his eyes. In his mind, one thought echoed with clarity. This is not the end. This is the beginning. In the corporate world, power is often measured by money, by shares, by first-class seats. But the story aboard Altius Flight 327 revealed something greater than all of that: dignity. Richard Caldwell may have relied on arrogance and old connections to impose his will, but the truth became undeniable. Shouting will never endure as long as steadfast silence. Daniel Mercer proved that sometimes the most powerful form of resistance is not to fight with anger, but to hold calm and steady until the system itself is forced to expose its flaws and correct them. From the perspective of an observer, I can say with certainty, this was not just an incident on a flight. It was proof that monumental change often begins with the smallest of moments: a boarding pass crushed in a fist, a dismissive glance. Yet if someone dares to stand firm, those small moments can ignite a shift that reshapes an entire system. If you believe that respect is not a privilege, but the minimum right of every human being, then press like and subscribe to continue with us on these journeys that uncover the truth. And before you go, leave a comment with just 2 words: quiet power, to show that you too believe in the silent strength that can change the world.